Sarah Martinez stood at the entrance of the Navy recruitment office, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the worn folder containing her documents. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and she could hear the distant sounds of military drills echoing from the nearby base. At 22, she had dreamed of this moment for years. But now that it was here, doubt crept into her mind like an unwelcome visitor. The recruitment officer, a stern-faced man with graying temples, looked up from his desk as she entered. His nameplate read Sergeant Williams, and his expression immediately shifted from neutral to skeptical as he took in her appearance. Sarah was petite, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with delicate features that made her look younger than her actual age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore her best dress shirt and slacks, hoping to make a professional impression. "Can I help you, miss?" Sergeant Williams asked, his tone suggesting he already knew why she was there and wasn't particularly enthusiastic about it. Sarah straightened her shoulders and approached the desk with as much confidence as she could muster. "I'm here to enlist in the Navy, sir. I have all my documents ready." The sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly and a small smirk played at the corners of his mouth. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with obvious amusement. "The Navy? Are you sure you're in the right place? The community college is about 3 blocks down the street." Heat rushed to Sarah's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. She had expected this reaction. Growing up in a military family, she had heard countless stories about women who faced similar dismissive attitudes when they tried to serve their country. Her grandfather had served in World War II, her father in Vietnam, and her brother was currently deployed overseas. Military service wasn't just a career choice for her. It was a family tradition that ran through her veins like blood. "I'm absolutely certain, sir," she replied firmly, placing her folder on the desk. "I've wanted to serve in the Navy since I was 12 years old." Sergeant Williams chuckled and shook his head. "Look, sweetie, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the military isn't a game. It's not like those movies you see on television. This is real life with real dangers and real responsibilities. Maybe you should consider something more suitable for someone like you." The condescending tone in his voice made Sarah's jaw clench, but she refused to back down. She had faced this kind of attitude her entire life. Teachers who assumed she wasn't smart enough for advanced classes, coaches who thought she was too fragile for competitive sports, and now a military recruiter who judged her based on her appearance alone. "I understand the risks, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "I've been preparing for this my entire life. I have excellent physical fitness scores, top grades from high school, and I've been studying military history and protocol since I was a teenager." The sergeant opened her folder reluctantly, scanning the documents with a dismissive expression. Her test scores were indeed impressive, and her physical fitness record showed she had consistently exceeded expectations. But his attitude didn't change. If anything, it seemed to irritate him that her credentials were so strong. "These are all very nice," he said, closing the folder with a snap. "But paperwork is one thing and real military service is another. Do you have any idea what kind of physical demands you'll face? The mental pressure? The combat situations you might encounter?" Sarah felt her patience wearing thin, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Yes, sir, I do. My father served 2 tours in Vietnam, and my brother is currently a Marine stationed overseas. I've grown up hearing their stories, understanding their sacrifices, and I want to continue that legacy of service." "Military families," the sergeant muttered, shaking his head. "Look, I'm sure your father and brother are fine soldiers, but that doesn't mean you're cut out for this life. Being a military brat and actually serving are 2 completely different things." The dismissive way he said military brat made Sarah's temper flare, but she kept her voice level. "I'd like to take the entrance exam and begin the enlistment process, sir." Sergeant Williams leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Listen to me carefully, young lady. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I can spot the ones who won't make it through basic training from a mile away. You seem like a nice girl, probably very smart, but the military will eat you alive. Find something else to do with your life. Something safer, something more appropriate." The word appropriate hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah realized that no amount of reasoning or evidence would change this man's mind. He had already decided she didn't belong in the military based on nothing more than her appearance and his own prejudices. "Sir, with all due respect, I believe I have the right to attempt enlistment regardless of your personal opinion about my suitability." she said, her voice gaining strength. I'm an American citizen. I meet all the basic requirements, and I'm willing to take any test or complete any process necessary to prove my capabilities. The sergeant's expression darkened. You have spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't stop bullets or help you carry a wounded comrade to safety. You're wasting my time and yours. Sarah stood up straighter, feeling a familiar fire ignite in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced when her high school guidance counselor told her she wasn't college material, or when her track coach said she was too small to compete with the other runners. That fire had pushed her to prove them wrong every single time. Then let me waste my own time, sir. I'd like to speak with someone who can process my application. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other potential recruits in the waiting area had stopped their conversations to watch the confrontation unfold. Some looked amused, others uncomfortable, but Sarah didn't care. She had come too far and dreamed too long to let one prejudiced recruiter destroy her plans. Sergeant Williams stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was chewing on words he couldn't say. Finally, he reached for his phone with obvious reluctance. The phone call that Sergeant Williams made seemed to take forever. Sarah could hear him speaking in hushed tones to someone on the other end, occasionally glancing at her with an expression that mixed irritation with something that might have been grudging respect. When he finally hung up, he looked like he had swallowed something unpleasant. Captain Morrison will see you in 10 minutes, he said curtly. But I'm warning you, he's not going to be any more encouraging than I've been. This is a waste of everyone's time. Sarah nodded politely and took a seat in the waiting area. Around her, other potential recruits shifted uncomfortably, some whispering among themselves about the confrontation they had just witnessed. A young man about her age leaned over and spoke quietly. That took guts, he said. Williams has been crushing dreams in this office for years. Most people just walk away when he starts his speech about finding something more appropriate. Well, I'm not most people, Sarah replied simply. The 10 minutes felt like an hour, but finally, a door opened at the far end of the office and a tall, distinguished-looking officer emerged. Captain Morrison was probably in his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of bearing that commanded immediate respect. Unlike Sergeant Williams, his expression was neutral as he approached. Miss Martinez? He said, extending his hand. I'm Captain Morrison. Why don't we step into my office and discuss your interest in naval service? His office was a stark contrast to the chaotic front desk area. Military commendations lined the walls, along with photographs showing the captain with various naval personnel in different locations around the world. Sarah noticed pictures from what looked like humanitarian missions, combat zones, and formal ceremonies. Please have a seat, Captain Morrison said, settling behind his desk. I understand you've had quite a conversation with Sergeant Williams this morning. Sarah chose her words carefully. He expressed some concerns about my suitability for military service, sir. I'd like the opportunity to address those concerns through the proper channels. Captain Morrison smiled slightly. Diplomatic answer. I appreciate that. He opened her folder and began reviewing her documents more thoroughly than the sergeant had. These are impressive credentials. Valedictorian of your high school class, varsity track team captain. Volunteer work with veterans organizations. Tell me why you want to join the Navy specifically. This was the question Sarah had been preparing to answer her entire life. My family has a long tradition of military service, sir, but it's more than that. I want to make a difference in the world, and I believe the Navy offers the best opportunity to do that. I'm particularly interested in naval intelligence and international relations. Naval intelligence, Captain Morrison repeated, looking up from the papers. That's a demanding field. What makes you think you're suited for it? I speak 3 languages fluently, sir. English, Spanish, and Arabic. I've been studying Middle Eastern politics and culture since high school, and I have a natural aptitude for analytical thinking. I also believe my appearance might be an asset in certain situations. The captain raised an eyebrow. How so? People often underestimate me, sir. They see a small young woman and assume I'm not a threat, or that I don't understand complex situations. That kind of assumption can be valuable in intelligence work. Captain Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with genuine interest. That's a sophisticated way of thinking about it. Tell me about your physical fitness preparation. For the next hour, they discussed Sarah's background in detail. She explained her training regimen, her academic interests, and her long-term career goals. Unlike Sergeant Williams, Captain Morrison asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. He didn't dismiss her ambitions or suggest she find something more appropriate to do with her life. "I have to ask," the captain said finally, "are you prepared for the challenges you'll face as a woman in the military? It's gotten better over the years, but there are still people who will question your abilities and your place in the service." Sarah thought about her morning encounter with Sergeant Williams. "I've been dealing with that my entire life, sir." "I'm ready for it," Captain Morrison nodded slowly. "I believe you are. Your test scores and fitness records are exceptional, and your motivation seems genuine. I'm going to recommend you for the standard entrance procedures." Relief flooded through Sarah, but she tried to keep her expression professional. "Thank you, sir. However," the captain continued, "I want to be honest with you about what you're facing. Basic training will be the most challenging experience of your life. You'll be pushed to your physical and mental limits, and some of your fellow recruits may not be supportive. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" "Yes, sir." "I've never been more certain of anything." Captain Morrison made several notes in her file, then looked up with a more serious expression. "There's something else I need to discuss with you. Sergeant Williams mentioned that you seemed determined to proceed despite his advice. Some recruits take that kind of opposition personally and let it affect their performance later. I need to know that you can handle criticism and setbacks without becoming defensive or letting emotions cloud your judgment." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Sir, I respect that Sergeant Williams was trying to prepare me for the realities of military service in his own way. I don't take his concerns personally, but I also don't believe that discouraging qualified candidates is in the best interest of the Navy. I can handle criticism when it's constructive and fair." "Good answer," Captain Morrison said, making another note. "One final question, and I want you to think about this carefully. If you could do anything else with your life, anything at all, what would it be?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "This is what I want to do, sir. I've considered other options, and none of them feel right to me. I want to serve my country, and I want to do it in the Navy." Captain Morrison closed her file and stood up. "Very well, Miss Martinez. Welcome to the United States Navy recruitment process. You'll need to complete medical examinations, additional fitness tests, and security clearance procedures. The whole process will take several weeks, but based on what I've seen today, I expect you'll do well." As they walked back toward the main office, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had cleared the first hurdle, but she knew much bigger challenges lay ahead. When they passed Sergeant Williams's desk, he looked up with obvious surprise. "She's proceeding with the enlistment process," Captain Morrison informed him. "Please schedule her for the complete battery of tests." Sergeant Williams's expression showed that he still doubted her chances, but he nodded professionally. "Yes, sir." As Sarah filled out the initial paperwork, she could feel the sergeant watching her, probably waiting for her to change her mind or show some sign of uncertainty. But her hand remained steady as she signed each document, and her resolve only grew stronger. 3 months later, Sarah found herself standing in formation at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center, surrounded by 80 other recruits who would become her shipmates for the next 8 weeks of basic training. The early morning air was crisp and cold, and the drill instructors paced in front of them like predators sizing up their prey. Chief Petty Officer Davis was a mountain of a man with a voice that could shatter glass and an expression that suggested he had never smiled in his entire life. His introduction to the recruits was brief and terrifying. They were no longer civilians, they belonged to the Navy now, and he would personally ensure that anyone who couldn't handle military life would be sent home in disgrace. Sarah had expected the physical challenges of basic training, but she hadn't anticipated how isolated she would feel. Out of the 80 recruits in her division, only 12 were women, and most of them were larger and more obviously athletic than she was. The male recruits ranged from farm boys who had been lifting heavy machinery since childhood to urban athletes who looked like they could bench press a car. During the first week, the doubt that others had planted in her mind began to grow. The physical training was brutal, designed to push every recruit beyond their comfort zone and identify their breaking points. Sarah struggled with some of the exercises, particularly those that required upper body strength, and she noticed the sideways glances from other recruits when she had to modify certain movements. The worst part wasn't the physical challenges, though. It was the whispered conversations she overheard in the barracks at night when exhausted recruits questioned whether some people really belonged there. Names weren't mentioned, but Sarah knew when they were talking about her. "I don't understand why they're lowering standards," one recruit muttered to his bunkmate. "This isn't a social experiment. People's lives depend on everyone being able to do their job." Another voice chimed in. "My cousin went through Marine boot camp, and he said they had to carry dead weight the whole time, because some people just couldn't keep up. It's not fair to the rest of us." Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and fighting back tears. She had known there would be resistance, but experiencing it firsthand was more painful than she had imagined. For the first time since she had walked into that recruitment office, she began to wonder if everyone else was right about her. The turning point came during the third week, during a combat training exercise that simulated a rescue mission under fire. The scenario involved teams of recruits navigating an obstacle course while carrying wounded comrades to safety. Sarah was paired with Rodriguez, a stocky recruit from Texas who had made it clear that he considered her a liability. "Just try to keep up," he said curtly, as their team prepared for the exercise, "and don't get in the way when things get serious." The course was designed to test every aspect of their training: physical endurance, teamwork, decision-making under pressure, and tactical thinking. Teams had to cross a series of obstacles while one member played the role of an injured comrade who couldn't walk. Sarah's team started well, moving efficiently through the first several challenges. Halfway through the course, Rodriguez stumbled while carrying their wounded teammate across a rope bridge. His ankle twisted badly and he went down hard, crying out in genuine pain. Suddenly, their simulated emergency became a real one. The drill instructors immediately halted the exercise for Rodriguez's team, but the situation was complicated. They were on a raised platform in the middle of the course, with Rodriguez unable to put weight on his injured ankle and their wounded teammate still needing to be transported to complete the scenario. Without hesitation, Sarah took charge. She quickly assessed the situation and realized that she would need to carry both Rodriguez and their simulated casualty to safety. The other members of their team were smaller than Rodriguez, and Sarah was the only one with enough technical climbing experience to navigate the remaining obstacles while managing two people. "Rodriguez, you're going to have to trust me," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "I'm going to get you both down from here, but you need to follow my lead exactly." Rodriguez looked skeptical, but the pain in his ankle was real, and he didn't have many options. "You can't carry both of us. You're too small." "I'm not going to carry you," Sarah explained quickly. "I'm going to belay you down using the rope system, then come back for Stevens." Stevens was playing their wounded teammate, but you have to trust me and do exactly what I say. What followed was a masterclass in improvised rescue techniques. Sarah used her knowledge of climbing and rope work, gained from years of rock climbing with her brother, to create a pulley system that allowed her to lower Rodriguez safely to the ground despite her smaller size. Then she returned for Stevens, using a different technique to transport him across the remaining obstacles. The entire evolution took 23 minutes, far longer than the standard time limit. But the drill instructors were impressed by her problem-solving skills and leadership under pressure. More importantly, her fellow recruits had witnessed her step up when the situation became real. That night, Rodriguez approached her bunk with a sheepish expression. His ankle was wrapped and elevated, but he had insisted on walking over to speak with her personally. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "and probably a lot more than that. I had you pegged all wrong." Sarah looked up from the letter she was writing to her family. "You were looking out for the team. I understand that." "No," Rodriguez said, shaking his head. "I was being a prejudiced jerk. You saved my butt out there, and you did it without making me feel like an idiot for doubting you. That takes class." Word of the incident spread through the division quickly, and Sarah noticed a shift in how her fellow recruits interacted with her. The whispered conversations about lowered standards stopped, and people began asking her advice about technical aspects of their training. She wasn't just accepted, she was respected. Chief Petty Officer Davis, who had seemed immune to any human emotion, pulled her aside after the next day's training session. "Martinez," he said in his characteristic gravelly voice, "that was good work yesterday. Real leadership under pressure." "Thank you, Chief," Sarah replied, still somewhat in awe of the man who had been terrorizing all of them for weeks. "Don't let it go to your head," Davis continued. You still have 5 weeks of training left, and I'll still drop you if you can't meet standards. But you proved something important yesterday. Not just to your shipmates, but to yourself. Sarah nodded, understanding that this was probably the closest thing to praise she would ever receive from Chief Davis. As the weeks progressed, Sarah found herself naturally falling into leadership roles during group exercises. Her combination of analytical thinking, physical conditioning, and genuine concern for her teammates made her someone others turned to when challenges arose. She still struggled with some of the purely physical aspects of training, but she had found ways to compensate through technique, preparation, and teamwork. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw her, it was in how she saw herself. The doubt and uncertainty that had plagued her during those first weeks had been replaced by quiet confidence and a clear sense of purpose. Graduation from basic training should have been the culmination of Sarah's journey, but instead, it marked the beginning of an entirely new set of challenges. Her exceptional performance had earned her a spot in the Navy's intelligence program, and she was assigned to the Naval Intelligence Center in Virginia Beach for advanced training. The intelligence school was a different world from basic training. Here, the emphasis was on mental acuity, analytical thinking, and the ability to process vast amounts of information under pressure. Sarah thrived in this environment, consistently ranking at the top of her class in courses on cryptography, threat assessment, and international relations. However, her success came with an unexpected price. Some of her instructors and fellow students began to whisper that she was receiving special treatment because of her gender, or worse, that her achievements weren't legitimate. The doubt that had followed her since her first day at the recruitment office had taken on a new form. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, her primary instructor in advanced analysis, was particularly skeptical of her abilities. He was a career intelligence officer who had served in multiple overseas assignments, and he made no secret of his belief that the military was being weakened by political correctness and lowered standards. "Miss Martinez," he said during one particularly challenging practical exercise, "your theoretical knowledge is impressive, but intelligence work in the real world requires more than book learning. It requires instincts that can't be taught, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure." The exercise involved analyzing intercepted communications and identifying potential terrorist threats from a massive amount of data. Sarah had completed the assignment faster than anyone else in the class and had identified threats that others had missed. But Lieutenant Commander Hayes seemed determined to find fault with her work. "Your analysis is thorough," he continued, "but it lacks the intuitive understanding that comes from real experience. You're processing information like a computer, rather than thinking like a human who understands how the enemy operates." Sarah felt her frustration building, but she kept her voice respectful. "Sir, could you provide specific feedback about how I could improve my approach?" "Experience, Martinez. Real experience. Something you can't get from textbooks or simulations." The criticism stung because Sarah knew there was some truth to it. She was performing well academically, but she had never been deployed overseas, never faced real danger, and never had to make decisions where lives actually hung in the balance. Her theoretical knowledge was extensive, but it was still just theory. The opportunity to prove herself came sooner than she expected. 3 months into her intelligence training, a situation developed in the Mediterranean that required immediate analytical support. A commercial cargo ship had gone missing in international waters, and intelligence suggested it might have been hijacked by a terrorist organization planning to use it for an attack. The Navy needed analysts who could work around the clock, processing satellite imagery, communications intercepts, and human intelligence reports to locate the vessel and determine the intentions of those who had taken it. Sarah volunteered for the assignment, despite warnings from her classmates that failure would likely end her career in intelligence. The task force assembled for the operation was impressive. Senior intelligence officers, satellite specialists, communications experts, and liaison officers from allied nations worked together in a secure facility that buzzed with activity 24 hours a day. Sarah was the most junior person in the room, and she could feel the skeptical glances from colleagues who wondered why someone so inexperienced had been assigned to such a critical mission. Admiral Chen, who commanded the task force, was a legend in naval intelligence circles. She had served in every major theater of operations over the past 2 decades and was known for her ability to see patterns that others missed. When she briefed the team on the first day, her message was clear. They had 72 hours to locate the missing vessel before it could be used for whatever attack the terrorists were planning. Sarah threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She analyzed satellite photos until her eyes burned, studied communications patterns until she could recognize individual voices, and cross-referenced intelligence reports from multiple sources to build a comprehensive picture of the situation. On the second day, she noticed something that bothered her. The communications intercepts showed conversations between suspected terrorists that seemed almost too obvious, too easy to decode. The language patterns were consistent with known terrorist groups, but there were subtle inconsistencies in dialect and terminology that suggested the speakers might not be native to the region they claimed to represent. Sarah spent hours analyzing these inconsistencies, comparing them to linguistic databases and consulting with regional experts. Her theory was radical. What if the communications were deliberate deceptions designed to lead the Navy away from the real location of the hijacked vessel? When she presented her findings to the task force, the reaction was mixed. Some senior officers were intrigued by her analysis, while others dismissed it as the overcomplicated thinking of someone who was trying too hard to find hidden meanings where none existed. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was particularly critical. "Martinez, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Sometimes the obvious answer is the correct answer. These terrorists aren't sophisticated enough to run the kind of deception operation you're suggesting." Admiral Chen listened to the debate without comment, then asked Sarah to explain her reasoning in detail. For 20 minutes, Sarah presented her analysis, showing how the linguistic patterns in the communications deviated from established norms and how the timing of the intercepts suggested coordination rather than spontaneous communication. "It's an interesting theory," the Admiral said finally, "but we can't base our search strategy on speculation no matter how well reasoned. We'll continue following the primary intelligence leads." Sarah felt deflated but not defeated. She continued working on her alternative theory during her off hours, using her own time to refine the analysis and search for additional evidence. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into a trap. On the morning of the third day, with time running out, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the metadata of one of the intercepted communications was a piece of information that the terrorists hadn't realized they were transmitting. GPS coordinates embedded in a digital photo that had been sent along with a voice message. The coordinates placed the hijacked vessel nearly 200 miles away from where the main search was focused, in a remote area where it would be almost impossible to detect using conventional methods. Sarah's hands shook as she verified the coordinates and cross-referenced them with satellite imagery from the time period when the ship had disappeared. She found it. The missing cargo vessel was hidden in a small cove, camouflaged to avoid detection from above, and positioned where it could easily reach several major population centers along the coast. Her theory about the deceptive communications had been correct. Sarah stared at her computer screen for a moment, realizing that she was looking at intelligence that could prevent a terrorist attack and save thousands of lives. She also realized that presenting this information would put her career on the line. If she was wrong, she would be finished in naval intelligence. If she was right, she would have succeeded where more experienced officers had failed. She gathered her evidence and walked across the operations center to Admiral Chen's desk, her heart pounding with each step. Admiral Chen looked up from her secure terminal as Sarah approached, noting the young analyst's obvious nervousness but also the determination in her eyes. The operations center around them hummed with tense activity as the deadline for locating the hijacked vessel drew closer. "What do you have, Martinez?" the Admiral asked, her voice calm despite the pressure everyone was feeling. Sarah placed her analysis on the desk, her hands steadier now that she had committed to this course of action. "Admiral, I believe I've located the missing cargo ship. The coordinates are embedded in the metadata of this intercepted communication." Admiral Chen examined the evidence carefully, her expression unreadable as Sarah explained how she had discovered the hidden GPS data and how it supported her theory about the deceptive communications. Around them, other officers began to take notice of the conversation, including Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who approached with obvious skepticism. "Martinez, this is highly irregular," Hayes interrupted. You're supposed to be working on assigned tasks, not pursuing personal theories that contradict established intelligence. Let her finish, Admiral Chen said firmly, continuing to study Sarah's analysis. Show me the satellite imagery. Sarah pulled up the enhanced photos on her tablet, pointing to the barely visible outline of a large vessel hidden beneath camouflage netting in a remote cove. The ship's dimensions match the missing cargo vessel exactly. The location provides easy access to 3 major ports and puts it within range of several significant population centers. The Admiral studied the images intently, then looked up at Sarah with a mixture of surprise and respect. This is solid work, Martinez. How confident are you in this assessment? Sarah took a deep breath. Confident enough to stake my career on it, ma'am. Admiral Chen nodded slowly, then turned to her operations staff. I want a full verification of these coordinates. Satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and aerial surveillance if we can get it without alerting the targets. She looked back at Sarah. If you're right about this, you may have just prevented a major terrorist attack. The next 6 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Surveillance assets were redirected to Sarah's coordinates, and within 2 hours they had confirmed the presence of the missing cargo vessel. More importantly, they had identified the modifications that had been made to the ship, confirming that it was indeed intended for use as a weapon. The rescue operation that followed was swift and decisive. Naval Special Forces units approached the hidden cove from multiple directions, coordinating their assault to minimize the risk to any hostages who might be aboard the vessel. Sarah watched the operation unfold on secure video feeds, knowing that her analysis had made it possible. When the assault team reported that the vessel was secured and the terrorist plot had been disrupted, the operations center erupted in subdued celebration. Admiral Chen stood and addressed the assembled staff, praising their work and emphasizing the importance of thorough analysis and creative thinking in intelligence operations. Later, as the immediate crisis was winding down, Admiral Chen called Sarah to her private office. The space was spartanly decorated, with only a few personal items among the official documents and secure communications equipment. Sit down, Martinez, the Admiral said, settling behind her desk. That was exceptional work today. You identified a pattern that more experienced officers missed, and you had the courage to pursue your analysis even when it contradicted conventional wisdom. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and relief, but she tried to remain professional. Thank you, ma'am. I was just doing my job. No, Admiral Chen said firmly. What you did today went well beyond your job description. You took a significant personal risk to pursue intelligence that you believed was critical, and you were right. That kind of analytical thinking and moral courage is exactly what we need in naval intelligence. The Admiral paused, studying Sarah with the same intensity she had brought to analyzing the terrorist threat. I'm going to be frank with you, Martinez. Your performance in this operation has impressed a lot of people, but it's also created some controversy. There are officers who feel that your success makes them look bad, and they're going to find ways to undermine your credibility. Sarah had expected this. I understand, ma'am. I've dealt with that kind of resistance before. I'm sure you have, Admiral Chen said, but this is different. You're moving into the highest levels of naval intelligence, where political considerations can be as important as analytical skills. You're going to need allies, and you're going to need to be even better than your critics expect. The Admiral opened a secure file on her desk. I'm recommending you for immediate promotion and assignment to a classified operation that requires your specific analytical skills. The assignment will involve extended deployment overseas, significant personal risk, and the kind of real-world experience that Lieutenant Commander Hayes says you lack. Sarah's heart raced. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of since joining the Navy, but she also understood the implications. What kind of operation, ma'am? I can't give you details until you accept the assignment, but I can tell you that it involves working with Allied intelligence services in the Middle East to track terrorist financial networks. You'd be operating under diplomatic cover, which means you'd be on your own if something went wrong. The choice was clear but not easy. Sarah could continue with her current training, eventually receiving a safe assignment that would advance her career without significant risk. Or she could accept this opportunity to prove herself in the field, knowing that failure could mean more than just the end of her military career. How long do I have to decide? Sarah asked. You don't, Admiral Chen replied. The operation launches in 72 hours, and we need someone with your language skills and analytical abilities. If you're not ready for this level of responsibility, I need to know now. Sarah thought about her conversation with Sergeant Williams in the recruitment office, about the doubts that had followed her through basic training, and about Lieutenant Commander Hayes's criticism of her lack of real experience. Every step of her military career had been a test of her determination and abilities. "I'll take the assignment, ma'am." Admiral Chen smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. "I hoped you'd say that. Report to the secure briefing room at 800 tomorrow. You'll receive your operational briefing and cover identity, and you'll meet the other members of your team." As Sarah left the Admiral's office, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was finally getting the chance to prove herself in real operational conditions. But she also knew that the stakes were higher than anything she had faced before. One mistake could compromise not just her own safety, but the safety of Allied agents and the success of a critical intelligence operation. Walking through the corridors of the intelligence center, she passed Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who nodded to her with grudging respect. The conversation they didn't have spoke volumes about how much had changed in just one day. She was no longer the untested analyst who might not belong in naval intelligence. She was an officer who had just been selected for one of the Navy's most sensitive operations. 8 months later, Sarah stood in a dusty marketplace in Istanbul, Turkey, playing the role of Elena Vasquez, a freelance financial consultant from Barcelona. Her cover was solid, backed by months of preparation and supported by intelligence services from 3 different countries. But today everything was about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. The operation had been going smoothly for weeks. Working with a joint task force of American, Turkish, and Israeli intelligence officers, Sarah had successfully infiltrated a terrorist financial network that was moving millions of dollars through legitimate business fronts. Her fluency in Arabic and Spanish, combined with her analytical skills, had made her invaluable to the operation. But intelligence work was never without risk, and on this particular morning, Sarah realized that someone had identified her as an American agent. The realization came when she noticed the same face in 3 different locations over the course of 2 hours, a sure sign that she was being followed. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She began executing the evasion protocols she had memorized, using the crowded marketplace to break visual contact with her surveillance team. But as she turned into a narrow alley, she found herself face to face with 2 men who were clearly not there by coincidence. "Miss Vasquez," one of them said in accented English, "we need to have a conversation." Sarah's mind raced through her options. Running would confirm their suspicions, but cooperation might give her a chance to maintain her cover story. She decided to play the confused tourist. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" she said in Spanish, then switched to broken English. "I don't understand. What do you want?" The second man stepped closer, his hand moving to something concealed beneath his jacket. "We know who you are and why you're here. The question is whether you're going to cooperate or whether this is going to become unpleasant." Before Sarah could respond, the situation exploded into chaos. Turkish security forces, who had been monitoring the terrorist cell, chose that moment to launch their own operation. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, and suddenly Sarah found herself caught in the middle of a firefight between terrorists, Turkish police, and her own backup team. In the confusion that followed, Sarah was separated from her support team and found herself alone in hostile territory, with her cover blown and multiple armed groups looking for her. Using skills learned in basic training and refined through months of operational experience, she managed to evade capture and make her way to a predetermined safe house. But when she arrived at the safe house, she discovered that it had been compromised. The apartment was empty, with signs of a struggle suggesting that her backup team had been captured or worse. Sarah was truly on her own in a foreign country, with no way to contact her handlers and no clear path to safety. For 3 days, she evaded capture while trying to find a way to extract herself from the situation. She used every technique she had learned about urban survival, changing her appearance, avoiding surveillance cameras, and staying ahead of the search teams that were combing the city for her. On the 4th day, exhausted and running out of options, Sarah made a desperate decision. She would try to reach the American consulate, even though doing so would expose her to significant risk. As she approached the consulate building, scanning for surveillance, she noticed increased security activity that suggested something unusual was happening. What she didn't know was that her disappearance had triggered a diplomatic crisis. The joint intelligence operation had been blown, several Allied agents were missing, and the Turkish government was demanding answers about American intelligence activities on their soil. Admiral Chen had personally flown to Turkey to coordinate the search effort and manage the diplomatic fallout. As Sarah approached the consulate, she was spotted by Turkish security forces who immediately moved to apprehend her. But before they could reach her, she was intercepted by a man in an American naval uniform who seemed to appear from nowhere. "This way, quickly," he said, grabbing her arm and steering her toward a side entrance. "Admiral Chen is waiting." Sarah found herself hustled through a series of secure corridors to a conference room, where Admiral Chen sat across from several Turkish officials and American diplomats. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Sarah realized that her presence had just complicated an already difficult situation. "Martinez," Admiral Chen said, relief evident in her voice. "We need to debrief you immediately. The Turks are claiming that this operation violated their sovereignty, and we need to understand exactly what happened out there." For the next 4 hours, Sarah provided a detailed account of everything that had occurred, from the moment she realized her cover was blown until her arrival at the consulate. Her debriefing revealed critical intelligence about the terrorist network's operations and confirmed that the Joint Task Force had been infiltrated at the highest levels. More importantly, her survival and successful evasion had prevented the terrorists from capturing an American intelligence officer who knew details of ongoing operations in other countries. The information she had gathered during her time in the field proved crucial to rolling up the entire terrorist financial network. After the formal debriefing, Admiral Chen asked to speak with Sarah privately. They walked to a secure office where the Admiral closed the door and activated a device that would prevent electronic surveillance. "Martinez," the Admiral began, "I need you to understand the significance of what you accomplished out there. You not only survived a blown operation, but you gathered intelligence that led to the disruption of a major terrorist network. More importantly, you demonstrated the kind of judgment and resourcefulness that we need in our most sensitive operations." Sarah was still processing everything that had happened. "Admiral, I made mistakes. My cover was blown, the operation was compromised, and people got hurt." "Yes, mistakes were made," Admiral Chen agreed, "but not by you. The operation was compromised by a leak in the Turkish security services, something that was completely beyond your control. What matters is how you responded when everything went wrong." The Admiral moved to a window overlooking the busy Istanbul street. "I've been in naval intelligence for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of operations go bad. The difference between officers who survive and those who don't usually comes down to their ability to think independently and adapt when their training meets reality." She turned back to Sarah with an expression that was both serious and proud. "What I saw in your debriefing was an officer who made good decisions under extreme pressure, who maintained operational security even when her life was in danger, and who completed her mission despite impossible circumstances." Admiral Chen approached her desk and opened a secure file. "I have something for you, Martinez. Your performance on this operation, combined with your previous analytical work, has earned you a commendation from the Secretary of the Navy and a recommendation for advancement to the highest levels of naval intelligence." Sarah looked at the documents with amazement. 6 months ago, she had been questioned about whether she belonged in the military at all. Now she was being recognized for exceptional service in one of the Navy's most demanding fields. "There's something else," Admiral Chen continued. "I want you to know that there's a small tattoo on your shoulder that became visible when you were changing clothes during your medical examination. It shows an anchor with the words, 'Legacy of Service' underneath. When I saw that, I understood something important about your motivation for military service." Sarah touched her shoulder unconsciously. The tattoo was a tribute to her father and brother, both of whom had served with distinction. She had gotten it after graduating from basic training as a reminder of the family tradition she was continuing. "That tattoo tells me that you understand service isn't just about personal achievement," the Admiral said. "It's about being part of something larger than yourself, something that connects you to everyone who has worn the uniform before you." As Sarah prepared to return to the United States, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the skeptical recruitment sergeant to the doubting instructors to the life-threatening mission in Istanbul. Every challenge had tested her resolve and strengthened her commitment to naval service. She was no longer the young woman who had to prove she belonged in the military. She was a naval intelligence officer who had earned her place through competence, courage, and dedication. The doubters would always exist, but their opinions no longer mattered. She had proven herself where it counted most, in service to her country and her fellow sailors.